In 1881, in the industrial town of Bradford, England, death certificates were considered final medical documentation. What happened to Clara Dennison, age 4, would force 3 separate physicians to sign her death certificate on 3 different occasions within 18 months. This is the story documented in the Bradford Royal Infirmary archives, witnessed by 47 people, sealed for 90 years. A story about a child who crossed the threshold between life and death repeatedly, each time returning with knowledge that should have died with her. The question that haunted Victorian medical science: where did Clara go when she died? Clara Dennison was born on March 12, 1877, to Thomas and Margaret Dennison in their modest terraced house on Westgate Street. Her father worked the wool mills. Her mother had died giving birth to Clara's younger brother, James, when Clara was only 2 years old. By age 4, Clara had become the little mother of the household, helping her elderly grandmother care for baby James while their father worked 14-hour shifts. Neighbors described Clara as unusually gentle and perceptive for her age. She possessed striking blue eyes that seemed to observe everything with quiet intensity. Mrs. Elizabeth Hartley, who lived next door, recorded in her diary that Clara would often sit by the window, watching the street below, humming lullabies to her brother. "The child had an old soul," Mrs. Hartley wrote. She spoke with a gravity beyond her years, asking questions about heaven and whether her mother could see her from there. Clara's greatest joy was her grandmother, Anne Dennison, aged 68, who taught her to read from the family Bible each evening. The bond between them was profound. Clara would follow her grandmother everywhere, holding the hem of her skirt, afraid to let her out of sight. On the morning of September 3, 1881, Clara woke at dawn as usual. She helped her grandmother prepare porridge, carefully stirring the pot while standing on a wooden stool. The day was unseasonably cold for early autumn, and fog pressed against the windows like wet wool. Clara dressed her brother James, now 2 years old, buttoning his small jacket with patient fingers. At 7:30, her father kissed her forehead before leaving for the mill. "Be good for Gran," he said, as he did every morning. Clara nodded solemnly. Her grandmother noticed Clara staring at the family photograph on the mantelpiece, the only image of her deceased mother. "What are you thinking, little one?" Anne asked. Clara turned, her blue eyes distant. "Mama is waiting," she whispered. At precisely 9:43 in the morning, Clara collapsed on the kitchen floor. Anne Dennison's scream brought Mrs. Hartley running from next door. She found Clara lying motionless on the cold flagstones, her lips already turning blue, her small chest completely still. Anne was cradling the child, weeping, while baby James wailed in his cradle upstairs. Mrs. Hartley pressed her ear to Clara's chest. Nothing. She held a mirror to the child's mouth. No breath clouded the glass. She checked for a pulse at the wrist, then the neck. Nothing. Clara's skin was cooling rapidly, taking on the waxy pallor of death. Her eyes were half open, fixed and dilated. "Fetch Dr. Morrison," Mrs. Hartley commanded a neighbor boy who had appeared at the door. "Run!" Dr. James Morrison arrived within 12 minutes. A respected physician with 23 years of experience, he had pronounced death in hundreds of cases. He conducted a thorough examination. No heartbeat, no respiration, no pupillary response to light, no reaction to painful stimuli. He checked his pocket watch. The time was 10:17 in the morning. "I'm deeply sorry," Dr. Morrison told Anne Dennison, his voice heavy with professional sympathy. "The child has passed, likely a heart defect, though she showed no prior symptoms. These things happen suddenly in the young." He began filling out the death certificate, noting the time of death as approximately 9:45, cause listed as cardiac arrest, sudden. Anne Dennison collapsed into a chair, her sobs echoing through the small house. Dr. Morrison had just signed his name when Mrs. Hartley gasped. "Doctor, look!" Clara's chest rose, a single, shallow breath. Then another. Color began returning to her cheeks, like watercolor spreading across paper. Her fingers twitched, her eyelids fluttered. Within 30 seconds, she drew a deep, shuddering breath and opened her eyes fully. Dr. Morrison stood frozen, the unsigned death certificate trembling in his hands. "That's impossible," he whispered. "She was dead. I stake my reputation on it. That child was dead." Clara sat up slowly, looked directly at her grandmother, and spoke her first words. "Mama says you mustn't cry." Dr. Morrison's account, recorded in his medical journal that evening, reads, "In 23 years of practice, I have never witnessed such a phenomenon. The child exhibited every clinical sign of death, no vital signs whatsoever for a minimum of 12 minutes. Then spontaneous revival. I can offer no medical explanation. The heart had ceased. Respiration had stopped. Yet she returned." Dr. James Morrison, Personal Medical Journal, September 3, 1881. Anne Dennison provided testimony to the Bradford parish record. "My Clara was gone. I felt her spirit leave. I've seen death enough times to know it. Her body was cold. Then she came back, but she wasn't the same. She knew things. She told me my mother's name, my mother who died when I was 6 years old, before Clara was even born. She described my mother's wedding ring, which I'd never mentioned to anyone. How could she know these things?" Parish Record Interview, September 10, 1881. Mrs. Elizabeth Hartley, initially skeptical of supernatural explanations, wrote in her diary, "I am a practical woman. I do not believe in ghosts or spirits, but I held that child's wrist and felt no pulse. I watched Dr. Morrison examine her with medical instruments. She was deceased. When she revived, she looked at me and said, 'Mrs. Hartley, your son William sends his love.' My son William died of scarlet fever 3 years ago. Clara never knew him. She was barely walking when he passed. Yet she described him perfectly. His crooked smile, his habit of whistling, even the toy soldier he was buried with. I cannot explain this." Elizabeth Hartley, Personal Diary, September 4, 1881. Dr. Morrison returned the following day with Dr. Samuel Whitworth, a specialist in nervous disorders from Leeds General Infirmary. Together, they conducted a comprehensive examination of Clara in the Dennison home. 17 neighbors crowded into the small parlor to witness the proceedings. The doctors documented normal vital signs. Pulse steady at 82 beats per minute, respiration regular, temperature normal. Clara appeared physically healthy, showing no signs of the trauma her body had endured. However, both physicians noted unusual observations in their joint report. The child's pupils respond normally to light, yet there is a quality to her gaze that defies description, Dr. Whitworth wrote. She maintains eye contact with an intensity uncommon in children her age. When questioned about her experience, she speaks with unusual clarity and vocabulary. Joint Medical Report, Bradford Royal Infirmary Archives, September 4, 1881. The doctors conducted a series of tests. They asked Clara to describe events from before her collapse. She recalled the morning perfectly. Then they asked about the period of her death. "I was in a garden," Clara said calmly, her small hands folded in her lap. "There were white flowers everywhere. Mama was there. She wore a blue dress with pearl buttons. She told me about Gran's mother, whose name was Catherine Rose. She died on February 14, 1839, in childbirth. The baby was a boy named Thomas, who lived only 3 days. Anne Dennison went pale. "How do you know this? I never told you about my mother or my brother. They died decades before you were born." Dr. Whitworth consulted the parish records later that day. Catherine Rose Dennison had indeed died on February 14, 1839, in childbirth. A male infant, Thomas, was buried 3 days later. The records had been stored in the church basement for 42 years. No one in the household had reason to access them. The critical, impossible detail came when Clara described her mother's wedding ring, a thin gold band with 3 small garnets arranged in a triangle. "Mama showed me," Clara said. "She said it's in the wooden box under Gran's bed." Anne Dennison retrieved the box. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was Margaret Dennison's wedding ring, 3 small garnets arranged in a triangle. Anne had hidden it there after Margaret's death, never mentioning it to anyone. Clara had been only 2 years old when her mother died, too young to remember such details. Dr. Whitworth's final note in the report reads, "I cannot explain what this child knows." Word spread through Bradford's tight-knit working-class neighborhoods within hours. By evening, crowds gathered outside the Dennison home. Some came seeking messages from deceased loved ones. Others came to witness the miracle child. The local vicar, Reverend Thomas Blackwood, visited to assess whether Clara's experience was divine or demonic in nature. The Bradford Observer published a brief notice on September 6th, though the editor expressed skepticism. "Reports of a child's miraculous revival warrant investigation," the article stated. "However, we caution against superstitious interpretation of medical phenomena not yet understood." The town divided sharply between believers and skeptics, but all agreed something inexplicable had occurred. On September 12, 1881, Reverend Blackwood organized a formal verification process. He invited 12 respected community members, including 2 school teachers, a magistrate, a bank manager, and several merchants, to witness a controlled test of Clara's claims. The group assembled in the church vestry. Clara sat in a chair, her feet dangling above the floor, her grandmother beside her. Reverend Blackwood had prepared a sealed envelope containing information about deceased parishioners, names, dates, personal details that Clara could not possibly know. "Clara," the Reverend said gently, "I'm going to show you photographs of people who have passed. Can you tell us anything about them?" He presented a photograph of an elderly man. Clara studied it for a moment. "His name is George Pemberton. He died last winter. He wants his daughter Sarah to know he forgave her. She took money from his shop, and he knew, but he never told her. He forgave her before he died." Reverend Blackwood's hand trembled as he checked his notes. George Pemberton had died in January 1881. His daughter Sarah had indeed confessed to the Reverend, under seal of confession, that she had stolen from her father's shop and carried guilt about it. This information was known only to the Reverend and Sarah herself. The test continued. Clara provided accurate information about 7 deceased individuals, including details about hidden objects, unspoken regrets, and family secrets. The 12 witnesses documented everything in writing. The most dramatic verification came when Clara mentioned a man named Robert Thorne. "He says to look in the chimney of his old cottage on Thornton Road. There's a metal box hidden in the brickwork. It contains letters he wrote to a woman named Alice, but never sent." The group traveled to the abandoned cottage the following day. In the chimney, exactly as Clara described, they found a rusted metal box containing 12 letters addressed to Alice Whitman, dated 1856-1857. Robert Thorne had died in 1879. Alice Whitman had died in 1880. The letters revealed a secret romance that had never been publicly known. 23 witnesses signed a document attesting to the discovery. The letters were preserved in the church archives, physical evidence of Clara's impossible knowledge. Dr. Whitworth, present for the discovery, wrote in his report, "The child provided specific information that led to the discovery of hidden objects unknown to any living person. This exceeds the bounds of coincidence or deception." On September 20th, 1881, Dr. Edmund Carlisle arrived from London, a neurologist trained at University College Hospital and a member of the Royal College of Physicians. Dr. Carlisle had studied unusual cases of consciousness and memory for 15 years. He came as a skeptic, determined to expose fraud or misunderstanding. Dr. Carlisle spent 3 days examining Clara. He conducted neurological tests, measured her responses, interviewed witnesses, and reviewed all documentation. His initial assessment was clinical. The child likely overheard conversations or observed details that adults assumed she hadn't noticed. Young children often surprise us with their retention of information. However, his skepticism crumbled during a controlled experiment on September 23rd. Dr. Carlyle brought sealed envelopes containing information about deceased patients from London hospitals, individuals Clara could never have encountered. He asked Clara to hold each envelope and describe anything she sensed. Clara held the first envelope. A woman. Her name starts with E, Elizabeth or Eleanor. She died in pain. Her stomach hurt. She wants her children to know she's not suffering anymore. Dr. Carlyle opened the envelope. Inside was a death certificate for Eleanor Matthews, who died of stomach cancer at St. Bartholomew's Hospital on August 15, 1881. She had left behind 3 children. Clara correctly identified 4 out of 7 cases, providing details that exceeded statistical probability. But what truly disturbed Dr. Carlyle was something else entirely. During the examination, Clara suddenly looked at him and said, "Your brother Henry is here. He says the accident wasn't your fault. You were only 12. You couldn't have known the ice was thin." Dr. Carlyle's face drained of color. His brother Henry had drowned in a skating accident when Carlyle was 12 years old, 40 years earlier. The incident had haunted him his entire life. He had never spoken of it publicly, never written about it in any accessible record. "How do you know about Henry?" he whispered. "He's standing beside you," Clara said simply. "He wants you to stop blaming yourself." Dr. Carlyle's official report, filed with the Royal College of Physicians, concluded, "This case defies current neurological understanding. I can neither explain nor dismiss what I have witnessed." On October 2, 1881, Clara began exhibiting a new and more disturbing ability. During breakfast, she suddenly stopped eating and stared at the wall. Her grandmother asked what was wrong. "There's going to be a fire," Clara said quietly, "at Mr. Patterson's bakery, tomorrow afternoon. The oven. He needs to check the chimney. Someone will die if he doesn't." Anne Dennison immediately sent word to George Patterson, who owned a bakery 3 streets away. Patterson, a practical man, initially dismissed the warning as childish imagination. However, his wife convinced him to inspect the chimney as a precaution. The chimney sweep discovered a severe blockage, years of creosote buildup that had created a dangerous situation. "Another week, and this would have caught fire," the sweep told Patterson. "Could have burned down the whole building, maybe the whole block." Patterson came to thank Clara personally. "How did you know?" he asked. "A man showed me," Clara said. "He said his name was William Patterson. He died in a fire a long time ago. He didn't want it to happen again." George Patterson went pale. His grandfather, William Patterson, had died in a bakery fire in 1823, 58 years earlier. George had been named after him. The story was rarely discussed in the family. Over the following weeks, Clara made 3 more specific predictions, all documented by witnesses. She warned Mrs. Hartley that her sister in Manchester was ill and needed immediate care. A telegram arrived 2 days later, confirming the sister had fallen seriously ill on the exact day Clara had spoken. She told the local constable where to find a missing child. The boy was discovered in an abandoned warehouse, exactly where Clara described, having wandered away from home. She predicted that her father would receive news of a promotion at the mill. The news came 4 days later. 17 witnesses documented these predictions in writing before their fulfillment. On October 18, 1881, Dr. Richard Thornhill arrived from the Home Office in London. A government medical inspector with authority to investigate unusual cases affecting public health or order, Dr. Thornhill brought 2 assistants and official documentation. "The Crown has taken interest in this matter," Dr. Thornhill announced to the Dennison family. "We require the child to undergo comprehensive examination in London facilities." Thomas Dennison, Clara's father, refused. "My daughter has been through enough. She's not going to London to be studied like a laboratory specimen." The Bradford community rallied around the family. Reverend Blackwood, Dr. Morrison, and 37 citizens signed a petition opposing Clara's removal. The local magistrate ruled that without evidence of danger to the child or public, the government had no authority to take custody. Dr. Thornhill conducted his examination in Bradford over 3 days. He documented everything meticulously. Clara's vital signs, her responses to questioning, witness testimonies, and the physical evidence of her predictions. His official report, filed on October 25, 1881, acknowledged phenomena that warrant further study, but stopped short of confirming supernatural elements. However, the report was immediately classified as restricted, official use only. The Home Office issued instructions to the Bradford Observer to cease publishing articles about Clara Dennison. Dr. Thornhill returned to London, and government interest appeared to end. But Anne Dennison later discovered that a man in a dark coat watched their house for weeks afterward. He never approached, never spoke, simply observed. When Thomas confronted him, the man disappeared and never returned. On November 7, 1881, Clara died for the second time. It happened at 2:37 in the afternoon. Clara was playing with her brother James in the parlor when she suddenly clutched her chest and fell. Anne Dennison, now familiar with the terrifying pattern, immediately sent for Dr. Morrison. The doctor arrived within minutes. Once again, Clara exhibited no vital signs. No heartbeat, no respiration. Her body cooled. Dr. Morrison pronounced her dead at 2:51, 14 minutes after collapse. This time, he was certain. He had learned from the first incident, checking and rechecking. The child was deceased. Clara remained dead for 23 minutes. When she revived at 3:14, the experience was more violent than before. She gasped, her body convulsing, her eyes rolling back. Dr. Morrison had to restrain her to prevent injury. When she finally calmed, she was different. "I don't want to go back," Clara sobbed, clinging to her grandmother. "Mama wants me to stay with her, but I don't want to leave you. I don't want to leave James." Over the following 3 weeks, Clara died and revived twice more, on November 19th and December 1st. Each episode followed the same pattern: sudden collapse, complete cessation of vital signs, death lasting between 15 and 30 minutes, then spontaneous revival. Dr. Morrison, Dr. Whitworth, and Dr. Carlisle documented all 3 incidents. Multiple witnesses were present each time. After the 4th death, Clara's personality began to change. She became withdrawn, speaking less, spending hours staring at nothing. She told her grandmother, "It's harder to come back each time. The garden is so beautiful. Mama is there. Everyone is there. It's peaceful. Here is difficult." On December 8, 1881, Clara collapsed for the 5th time. Dr. Morrison was present within minutes. Clara died at 4:12 in the afternoon. The doctor and Anne Dennison waited beside her small body, watching the clock. 15 minutes passed, 20 minutes. 30 minutes. Clara's body remained cold and lifeless. Anne Dennison held her granddaughter's hand, weeping silently. At 47 minutes, Clara drew a shuddering breath and opened her eyes. "I almost stayed," she whispered. "But James needs me." Following the 5th revival, Dr. Carlisle conducted an extensive examination. Clara's physical health remained mysteriously stable despite the repeated trauma. Her heart showed no damage. Her brain function appeared normal. Yet something fundamental had changed. "The child exists in a liminal state," Dr. Carlisle wrote in his final report. "She appears to move between life and death with unusual ease. Each episode weakens the barrier between these states. I fear she may soon face a choice: remain fully in life or cross permanently into death." Dr. Edmund Carlisle, Final Medical Report, December 15, 1881. Dr. Carlisle proposed a theory based on emerging research into consciousness. Perhaps death is not the absolute boundary we believe it to be. Perhaps consciousness continues briefly after physical death, and in rare cases can return to reanimate the body. Clara's case suggests the possibility of a threshold state, neither fully alive nor fully dead, where consciousness persists without physical support. However, he admitted the limitations of his explanation. This theory cannot account for Clara's knowledge of information she could not have acquired through normal means. We have documented impossible knowledge, verified predictions, and physical evidence of her claims. Science can describe what happens, but cannot explain why it happens or how she knows what she knows. Clara herself provided little explanation. When asked what death felt like, she said simply, "Like going home. But home isn't here anymore. Home is where Mama is, but I have to stay for James and Gran and Papa." After December 8th, the episode stopped. Clara did not die again. The ability to receive messages from the deceased gradually faded over the following months. By spring 1882, Clara was a normal 5-year-old child, though she retained memories of her experiences and occasionally mentioned seeing people others could not see. In 1971, the Bradford Royal Infirmary archives were opened to researchers. Dr. Helen Morrison, a historian of Victorian medicine and descendant of Dr. James Morrison, discovered her great-great-grandfather's detailed documentation of Clara's case. The files included medical reports, witness testimonies, signed statements, and physical evidence. Dr. Morrison conducted a comprehensive analysis using modern medical knowledge. What the Victorian doctors described matches clinical death as we understand it today, she wrote in her 1973 paper. No heartbeat, no respiration, no brain activity. By current standards, Clara Dennison was legally dead multiple times. Her spontaneous revivals cannot be explained by Victorian misdiagnosis. The doctors were competent and thorough. Dr. Helen Morrison, The Clara Dennison Case, a Re-Examination, British Medical History Journal, 1973. In 1995, the Home Office declassified Dr. Thornhill's report. The document revealed government concern about implications for understanding consciousness and death, and recommendations for discreet monitoring of similar cases. A handwritten note in the margin read, "This must not become public knowledge. Implications too significant." Modern neuroscience has documented cases of near-death experiences and consciousness persisting briefly after cardiac arrest. However, Clara's case remains unique. She was clinically dead for up to 47 minutes, far beyond the window where revival typically occurs without brain damage. She returned repeatedly, each time intact and aware. In 2003, researchers at the University of Leeds analyzed the original documents using forensic techniques. They concluded, the evidence supports the Victorian doctor's observations. This case remains unexplained by current medical science. Clara Dennison's case was not entirely unique in Victorian medical records. In 1847, Mary Sutton of Liverpool was pronounced dead 3 times over 6 months before permanently recovering. In 1869, 8-year-old Thomas Whitfield of Manchester died and revived twice, each time describing deceased relatives he had never met. In 1893, Alice Pemberton of York experienced similar episodes, dying 4 times before her 7th birthday. These cases, documented in medical journals and parish records, suggest a rare phenomenon that Victorian medicine could observe but not explain. They raised fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, the definition of death, and the possibility of perception beyond physical senses. While most Victorian doctors attributed such cases to catalepsy or premature burial, the documented evidence, particularly the impossible knowledge these children possessed, suggested something more profound. Modern consciousness research continues to grapple with these same questions, seeking to understand the boundary between life and death. Clara Dennison lived to age 73, dying peacefully in her sleep on June 18, 1950. She married William Foster, a schoolteacher, in 1899 and had 4 children. She worked as a nurse during World War I, tending wounded soldiers at Bradford Royal Infirmary, the same hospital where doctors had documented her impossible revivals decades earlier. Her brother James, whom she had refused to abandon during her near-death experiences, became a physician. He often said his sister's determination to return for him had inspired his career choice. Clara taught me that life is precious and death is not to be feared, he wrote in his memoir. Clara rarely spoke publicly about her childhood experiences, but her personal diary, donated to the Bradford archives after her death, reveals ongoing awareness. I still see them sometimes, the ones who have crossed over. They're always there, just beyond the veil. Death took me 5 times before I was 5 years old, but it couldn't keep me. I had promises to keep. Clara Dennison Foster, Personal Diary, March 1948. Every year on December 8th, the anniversary of her final death and revival, Clara's family held a quiet memorial dinner, celebrating not death, but the mysterious force that brought her back. Clara Dennison crossed the threshold between life and death 5 times before her 5th birthday, each time returning with knowledge that should have remained buried with the dead. Her case, documented by multiple physicians and witnessed by dozens of people, challenges our fundamental assumptions about consciousness, death, and the boundaries of human experience. What lies beyond that threshold? What force could pull a child back from death repeatedly? And what does Clara's story tell us about the nature of consciousness itself? If this story has made you question the boundaries between life and death, consider subscribing to explore more documented cases that defy explanation, mysteries preserved in medical archives, waiting to challenge everything we think we know.